Hey friends, and welcome back to Social Audio Think Tank. Today we're talking the Promo-isode. I know this may be the one episode where Jackson and I want to dive through each end of Skype and decapitate each other. And we might scream, I know, bloody murder about past Test cricket results and any other rivalries the UK and Australia have had in the past. I think that this is the one where you're going to hear us completely disagree. So we're talking podcast promos. Yes, no. When do they work? When don't they work? And what could be better about the ones that we do hear out there? And are there any that actually have turned you on to listening to a show? So we've got a bit to get through, Jackson. So we might just dive straight in. I think you were hoping that podcast promos could be used to spread the word about different shows on the network. And I just think I need to make a caveat. When I say podcast promos, I'm not talking about network branding. For example, at the start of Adam Carolla, when it says something like you're listening to Carolla Digital, that's on all of their shows, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm also talking about a promo for a specific show within another show. So I guess for me, an example might be if I stick a DIY music movement promo right in the middle of Braver by the Day. And whereas if I was to put something at the start of all of those shows, this is a production of Oz Podcasts, that to me is not what I'm talking about. So that's my definition. So I guess, did you want to just fill me in what you think a podcast promo is before we get too bogged down in arguing and, the aforementioned killing of each other?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of three areas. There's what you said, the ID, so saying you're listening to Oz Podcasts network show or whatever. There's sort of the advertising realm of go buy our product, but then today we're focusing on this is a friend of the show or another network show, go listening to their podcast. So it's specifically the spots for other podcasts.
Yeah, and I'm considering when I say promo or for the Promo-isode, a pre-recorded segment that's generally done by not yourself.
Yeah.
So not me as Josh from Braver by the Day. It would be either me or someone else from DIY Music Movement that's recording that. So I'm talking about a pre-recorded segment that's basically edited in after the fact. So
can I assume then your feelings are different if it's spoken by the host of the show?
Oh, it's completely. I mean, I've found most of the best shows that I listen to now through personal recommendations of hosts. Like Will Anderson, a big Australian podcast, has turned me on to 2 or 3 of the better comedy podcasts that I've ever heard. Whereas if they had promos in his show, I don't think I would have checked them out at all. So, yeah, I'm talking about just pre-recorded segments that aren't exactly, personalised for every episode. So that's where I'm coming from. I know that's a pretty tight definition, but are we okay to agree that that's what we're, I guess, talking about today? So,
yep. Let's throw down.
I'll let you go first because you're coming from the network point of view now. For anyone who's new to the show, Jackson is Jackson from ozpodcast.com.au, which is a podcasting directory which now has its own network with a few of Jackson's own shows, Social Audio Think Tank, which you're listening to now, a few of my other shows, and also Wrestle Radio Australia. So it's probably going to grow a little bit more, but that's what we're talking about today. So I guess we can use that as a framework for talking about promos within that network, I guess. So, Jackson, were you hoping to use promos in the network, and what was your hope that those promos would achieve?
Well, my model for a podcast network, and the place where I've probably heard the most podcast promos, is the Adam Carolla show, which I think is the show I've been listening to for the longest time. I sort of come and go a lot with shows, but that's the one I've been a dedicated listener for many years. And they play promos for other shows on their network probably once or twice an episode. So that's become a fairly natural thing for me to hear that and say that's coming up. And I think I have listened to other shows on their network. I can't specifically remember if it was because of the promo or if it was because of, like you said, just the personal recommendation, or they came and guested on an episode or something like that. So I can't really comment as to their effectiveness for me. But yeah, my basic model was that if it works for them, then it'll work for me. So I'll do the same thing. Okay, everyone on the network record a promo, and everyone on the network play someone else's promo. And I'd sort of had a pilot program in that I'd got some other podcasts to share their own promos and play their own promos. And that sort of died a little bit because there was a handful of shows that recorded promos, and there was a handful of shows that played the promos, and some were really dedicated and others not. But it didn't take off in the way I'd hoped. So I think my basic answer to this is I want it to work, but I can kind of see why someone might not think it's a great idea. So I'll throw it back to you. What's your opinion on it?
I don't like them, and I know that's pretty simple, and I don't want it to sound that simplistic, but I don't think I've ever listened to a show because of a promo, but I have disliked the show that I'm currently listening to more because they play promos. And I think that Adam Carolla is slightly unique in that his audience generally, from what I can gather, because I'm a big fan of the Adam and Dr. Drew show and also the Dr. Drew podcast. I've been listening to those on and off for the last maybe 3 months, whereas I didn't really enjoy the Adam Carolla show much when I listened to it. He has a certain type of audience and a certain political persuasion himself amongst him and his hosts and the audience in general, from what I can gather from the feedback that they get, that all of the shows are maybe culturally aligned enough and socio-economically aligned enough that the people that listen to one will be more likely than the average person to like the other shows on their network. Whereas I think generally when I hear a podcast promo, it's something that it sounds like they've dropped it in as a favor or just in the hope of getting another cross-promotional tool back from whoever the person is they promoted, without giving a lot of thought to the fact that does playing this in my show actually negatively affect the listeners I already have, when it's highly unlikely that anyone who's interested in my audience will go check the other person out, and vice versa. If they play me, their audience probably won't come check me out. So, yeah, I'm actually, as I mentioned to Jackson, I was a little bit of a bitch about it, to be honest, and I wasn't prepared to play anything other than Oz Podcast branding in Braver by the Day, because that to me is just a show where it's somewhat serious, and I don't think my audience would appreciate any other promos, even for my own shows in that show. Whereas I think the audience of DIY Music Movement would be far more forgiving. And that is a show where I'm planning on playing promos freely and maybe playing several of them, as long as they're maybe 15 seconds-ish long, several of those per episode. So I think Jackson was aware that that was my plan. But I think it really comes down to what type of show you have and whether you think that playing a promo might actually annoy the audience you already have as opposed to get you a bigger one from someone else. So I'm not into the back scratching thing, I guess. If I can't see it helping my own audience much if I'm promoting shows that have absolutely no relevance to them. So,
yeah, I think you're right. I've sort of dug a bit of a hole for myself in making the Oz Podcast Network, in that the thing that all the podcasts on the network share is that they're Australian, and that's it. So it's sort of hard to say if you like show X, you'll like show Y, because it's also Australian. I don't think anyone's going to really follow that criteria. So, I understand your point there.
And I guess another thing for me is that I'm not sure how it is for a lot of Australian shows, but for Braver by the Day and DIY Music Movement, which are the two shows that Jackson was interested in taking on that I have at the moment. I have a few others that maybe aren't quite as, regular or as serious or anything like that. A lot of the audience for both those shows aren't Australian. For DIY Music Movement, they're predominantly not Australian. So I can't see me promoting other shows that make no sense just because they happen to be Australian as well as really benefiting my audience at all. But I'm thinking that just given that they're music fans, that things like some of your shows, which are about creative stuff, and also Wrestle Radio Australia, is maybe something that a portion of my audience, because they are generally into heavier style guitar bands, might actually be interested in wrestling. So, and hearing about the fact that wrestling has a bit of an underground cult following in Australia, whereas for Braver by the Day, I can't see many of the people outside of Australia really caring at all about my music marketing show or a wrestling show or anything like that. And that's no reflection on quality. The shows are all great. And I don't think Jackson would have taken them on the network if they weren't amongst the better shows produced in Australia. It's just sometimes you need to look after the audience you already have instead of continuously trying to get new listeners all the time. But that's just my opinion once again.
Well, I would say I understand that from your perspective, and as a podcaster, I understand that. From a network point of view, maybe not so much. I think the network's probably more about the audience. You mentioned before that if it's a spoken and it's like an honest personal recommendation, then it's fine. So what if it was the promo, but it was voiced by you?
I still wouldn't. I think that, I mean, to say that I would do, mention someone just during my episode, just like a live read.
Yeah.
That to me doesn't seem all that honest either, because if I don't like the show, I'm not going to talk about it. So that's not in relation to the shows that are with the network at the moment. I just mean, obviously, every network over time grows, and it's unlikely that you're going to love every show on a podcast network. I mean, some of those networks have so many shows that you wouldn't even be able to listen to them all if you're on there. So
yeah,
I think I'd rather hear just someone mention something that they honestly found interesting in a show, and maybe, for example, you could point out something that was really interesting about one particular episode of a show that you listen to that's on the same network, or even just, we need to go beyond the network maybe now and just talk about in general. I don't think that you need to love every episode by a certain show to still recommend it to your audience if you think that they might like that episode you liked, or they might like the show more in general. I can see pointing out certain things for your audience as being probably more interesting to your audience than they are to you. I mean, I've done that with Social Audio Think Tank, that I've actually pointed out certain podcasts that are doing things awesome as far as how they work, their audience or their crowd or whatever, that maybe I don't listen to myself. I just happened to notice they were doing something creative as a podcaster. So, yeah, I'd probably have to give that some more thought. I don't think that I would just read a podcast myself and drop that in there. I don't think that makes any difference. But if I was to do a live read of something that I liked during the show and I genuinely believed it, I'd be happy to do that in every episode.
Well, okay, that's I see your point there. I think for me, like when it comes to advertising, I think I'd be on the same boat. The pre-recorded advertisers really just don't interest me, and I skip over them as much as possible. But then if there's a live read or even something like, especially on the Adam Carolla show, and I think we talked about this previously, and you mentioned that Joe Rogan does the same thing, where he's doing a live read, but you don't necessarily know that it's a live read. It's just sort of seamless in the show. And I think that works. I'm totally happy to listen to that. Won't necessarily buy their products because it's often not applicable to anyone outside of America. So I think the live reads are better. But what you said is giving me an idea. Might be a bit abstract at the moment. What if it was, say, I gave you, here's what's happening on the network this week, and if you see something you like, then you say, this is happening on the network, check it out.
That would be fantastic. And it's funny, I was about to, instead of cutting you off, I was thinking myself that maybe even when podcasters are introducing their shows to other people, you actually point out a few specific things that you might actually think this person's audience is interested in. For example, if it's for DIY music movement and you wanted to point maybe an episode of Films from the Granny to me, it would be really cool if you could point out something maybe that has an awesome soundtrack or, an awesome opening song or that it has maybe it's a biker movie or something, and there's all these biker bars full of bands. That's something maybe that would be more interesting to my audience. And if you told me specifics, then I would probably be more likely to talk about it or even play a promo. But it would have to be about that specific thing. But I think that basically my big issue is just dumping promos up on some website and hoping that people are just going to download and put them in their own shows completely out of context and just play them and hope that your show's good. Because that I don't think I just could never do that. I would need to have some context for the show, and more than likely I would need to listen to it already to make sure that it's up to snuff. So, yeah, but I think that idea you had is amazing. That's one step beyond what I was thinking, again, is actually having some kind of, hey, here's what's up with the network. And maybe for podcasters that aren't part of a network, they could find a whole group of shows that maybe they have some cross-pollination of audience, and maybe, just share once a month what's going on with your show. I mean, no one's going to get angry if you send them that email every once in a while. Hey, 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're going to feature a guest that your audience might love to hear. I reckon that's an excellent idea. So is that something you might roll out with the network, do you think?
Yeah, well, I sort of have similar plans going off the network anyway. So I think then we decided a sort of, well, I was about to say a sneaky promo, but I guess it's a more honest promo. It's just you promote the content that you like and that your audience would like. That's
definitely it. And I guess there's probably people that are listening now thinking, geez, Josh, you sound like such a little bitch. But as this show is for the non-business crowd, which I want to go into in the future, I think I might have pushed a little bit too hard that the show's not about business. I'm all for people making their podcasts their business, and I'm hoping we'll have more shows about that in the future. I just meant that we're not going to podcast about business. So maybe I should clarify that in the future, and probably need to do that for most episodes. But I don't even know where I was going then. But yeah, I think it's just my artistic side would rather just not have something out in the world if I don't believe it 100% that I could stand by. And podcasts are out there forever. So if someone walks up to me and said, do you really like that episode by The Bugle, or did you just mention it to fill in a spot on your show? I want to be able to say, well, actually, I really enjoyed The Bugle and was surprised by how good it was. I want to always be able to be honest. And I guess we're kind of doing little podcast promos at the end of our show anyway.
Yeah.
But they are just fully honest. Hey, what did you really like this week? And there's no reason why you have to talk about famous shows when you do that. You could point out your best mate's show or someone that you hardly know that doesn't have a big audience. Yeah, I think as long as it's honest, then promos are a go. So you might have changed my mind on that.
Well, the other thing is, I take your point on that it's more honest, but also it sort of feels a bit more like recording a 30-second promo once and just saying, just drop this in once an episode. I think doing it the way I suggested earlier is a bit more work, but it's more honest, it's more genuine, and creatively, I think it's probably better.
Definitely. And I think maybe just to finish up, one of the main reasons why I haven't played a lot of promos that I've been sent, some of the shows that you were dealing with all have great sounding promos, and if they were appropriate to my audience, I would have been more than happy to play that. But a lot of the promo swapping websites and networks and all that stuff, the promos just sound absolutely atrocious. And you can't have a good sounding show and then drop an awful sounding promo in there, because that's never going to get people to listen to their show if their promo doesn't sound great. So my advice would be to get a great sounding promo if you are keen on having promos, because otherwise people just aren't going to play that on their shows.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The promos produced for the shows currently on the network are good, and maybe one or two others, but most of the promos I ended up with wasn't 100%. I wouldn't have produced it myself.
Yeah, so I guess that's maybe our tech tip for this week. And I know we said we're going to start doing a tech tip, and that is, if you're going to do a promo, actually do it, make it sound absolutely incredible, even if that means outsourcing some of the production or going and buying maybe some really good sounding music for your promo or something, and getting as good a like voiceover sound as you can possibly get. That would be my tech tip.
I think you need a good, strong, clear voice. You definitely need a music bed, and you've got to have it mixed properly. It's got to be loud and probably compressed pretty good to make it standard. If someone mixes down their podcast badly or someone mixes it bad, your promo is going to sound the same.
Excellent. So that will probably do for today. I just wanted to quickly say that the singer of my former band and one of my best friends, Rudy, his name is, actually pointed me to a show called We're Alive, or We Are Alive, it might be. And it's basically a zombie story, which is kind of told in the same way as like 24, the TV show was told. Basically, it's like you follow them through every minute. And I've listened to about 5 episodes, and it's got awesome production. It sounds like an audio drama. And yeah, that's a podcast. And I think it's got about 50 episodes out there. So We're Alive, if you're into the really creative side and the non-serious side of podcasting, that might be a show worth checking out.
I'm going to plug myself for a little bit, because I think a few episodes ago we talked about, on the Implode-isode, we talked about how I'd put the Forgetting Curve on pause. And then just about as soon as we released that, I brought the Forgetting Curve back. So the Forgetting Curve is back. Childhood stories told by the people who experience them, with music and sound effects to make an all-over audio adventure. So go check out the Forgetting Curve.
That's awesome, mate. And patreon.com/ozpodcast to support the network.
Support this show as well.
Support this show. So if you're getting any value at all out of this show, and we are going to have probably even some more mega episodes coming up soon, so some all-inclusive mic comparisons and different cool stuff for anyone who's searching for how-to advice, because I think that there's probably a portion of the audience that would like us to talk more about that stuff, given that between us we've probably produced several hundred or 500. I don't know how many podcasts you've produced, but I worked out I'm well into the 200-plus range now myself. So
yeah, I'm celebrating 2 years of Films from the Granny, so there's probably quite a few episodes in there.
Excellent. Cool, mate. Well, it's good to talk to you, and we didn't end up destroying each other, which I'm kind of disappointed about. I'm sure the audience wanted to hear fist fights, and maybe we can fight in a later episode. Just so
sure,
we'll call it the Promo-isode sequel, and it'll be like Rocky IV. It'll be really dramatic. Cool, mate. Well, I'll see you later.
See you later.
We were just the warriors. We were just the warriors, home and away, fighting for a piece of you. Just a little moment slipping away.
Listen to Australian podcasts. ozpodcasts.com.au